So we've obviously we've all been through these before. So as you know, this will be a videotape, so you can review it at your leisure. And also any comments that you want to make on the microphones, know that because you're here, you're consenting to being on camera. So here is the list. I certainly won't read these, but this is what we're going to be covering this morning. Our time is fairly tight because obviously there's a lot for us to cover. So we'll keep our comments brief and obviously have time at the end for discussion and questions. So with that.
Good. I'll start off with the budget letter. Of course, this is a series of presentations and things like that. They did another one in January saying as soon as we got the budget letter, we'd have a forum to talk about it. So it's there. It's posted on the website. Some of you may have already seen it. Of course, it's in a number of different places, but it's on our budget page as well. The letter itself, if you look it up, it's a 3-page letter with 3 pages of appendices. And we've extracted a couple of the key things that I'll throw up here on the slides. So the budget letter links back to what we had submitted back in the ops forecast. And so if you recall in the ops forecast, we talked about that before. We'd done a couple of different scenarios, but the one I guess that is most germane was where we said, hey, if we increase tuition by 2.5%, what would that mean if we maintain status quo in everything else? And at that point, we recognized, and this is what we informed government of, that at the status quo and at a 2.5% tuition increase, we would need 3.3% as a government grant. Now, you've already heard the news. We didn't get that. What we did get, and this is the extract from appendix number 1 of the budget letter itself, the top little chunk, we got 0%. And so the basic grant from government stayed the same. One of the good news items, and that's only through the good work of course, everyone from recruiting, retention, enrollment, research activity, and things like that, we did get a positive formula funding shift credit. So we got $886,000 as a funding shift. So that works out to be about 0.75%. As an increase to the government grant. So 0% from them, but we sort of earned, is the way I like to think of it, we've earned an additional $886,000. Most of that comes from increased full load equivalent, the number of people we're teaching, and of course, this is all just how the pie is sliced up between U of S and us. That's all that funding formula does, is decide how much. So we've done more teaching in the past couple of years. It's a 1-year lag, 5-year averaging, and so now we're catching up all those years that we were doing more teaching than them. So that's about 600 of the, almost 700 of that increase, and the rest is just good research activity, in particular CIHR, and Dave will talk more about the research successes. So we've earned that additional 886. Mackenzie Art Gallery, just another flow-through item to us, where that was being reduced from the government to Mackenzie. It flows through us. It'll be reduced by another $100,000. A significant part of the budget letter, of course, is the tuition piece. They don't, in the budget letter, they don't specify what the tuition increase is. That's something that's decided by the board when they meet on the 3rd and 4th of May. But just to give you a couple of different pieces that we used as we take and try and come up with the budget. One of the things, first of all, we have to make predictions for what do we think is going to happen next year. So at this point, or back when we were doing some of the ops forecast stuff, we said, well, maybe we can take and find some money by projecting a future increase. Whether we do that or not, that'll be part of the budget deliberations. But if we did, here's some of the scenarios. That 1% growth, if we increase the number of students by 1% next year, it would generate an additional $735,000. Now, if we also increase tuition, then you can see the numbers, with a 1% increase plus a 2.5% increase in both undergraduate and graduate work, that generates an additional $2.61 million. And the other scenarios, as you can see it, if we increase by 4.5%, then it almost generates 4 million. And if we differentially increased undergraduate by 2.5 and graduate by 5%, that generates 2.8 million. And you might contrast the second line with the fourth line, so that increase in graduate tuition would generate about $210,000.
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me? Is the microphone on? So just to go back for a moment to that notion, we're exploring all of these options. Obviously, one of the things that we're becoming very conscious of is that on national terms, the University of Regina remains competitive for undergraduate tuition and very affordable for graduate tuition. But in the west of Canada, which are our major competitor institutions like Saskatoon, Alberta, Calgary, and so on and so forth, we're now getting very close to the top of that group and exceeding places such as the University of Victoria in tuition. So we have to take all of this into account. Obviously, it's a major source of revenue, but if we make ourselves uncompetitive and we start losing students, or we are unable to recruit students because other universities are offering lower tuition structures, we have to recognize that challenge. So this is an update of a slide that we put out at the first budget forum. You'll, I think, remember some of it. That 1.6 million at the very top line has been built into the base. So last year, as you know, we exceeded our targets for enrollments and obviously tuition revenue. What we have done has built that into the base. That then becomes part of the base operating budget for this year and reflects that enrollment growth that we've seen over the past couple of years. There's a risk associated with that, but we think this is a calculated risk to take. The risk is that if something happens, if, let us say, there's a major event in the world, and we begin to lose students, particularly students from other countries or students from outside of Saskatchewan, that can then very quickly disappear. That tuition advantage can disappear. But right now it's built into the base. As you saw on the previous slide, if we have a 1% growth in enrollments next year, and we think we'll be able to do that, we're up about 735K. And again, 1.5 million if we increased undergraduate tuition by 2%, 240K if we did it for the grad tuition. And I think very notably, and we'll say more about this later on, there are tremendous savings being made now in utilities because of the energy efficiency steps that have been taken in a variety of buildings. The lab building is a notable example. We talked about that last time, and we'll show you a few more graphs this morning about how the university is saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in utility costs by doing things like replacing old light fixtures, monitoring natural gas consumptions, having fans not running all the time, and so on. And that adds up to a substantial sum of money. 0% on the grant, and as you saw before, an 886K shift from the University of Saskatchewan to us because our enrollments have grown more quickly than theirs have in recent years. From the previous slide, unchanged except we're playing with a number there. If we estimate that salary and benefit increases for our current component of people, that is faculty, QP, APT, QP 2419, QP 5791, out of scope and so on, we estimate salary and benefit increases to be roughly in the region of $3.3 million. We're obviously in negotiations with the Faculty Association on the faculty contract. APT and QP have been settled. So we'll see how the faculty negotiations go, but that's an estimate right now. And we had, in response to the call for suggestions about reinvestments, that is new faculty positions, new APT and QP positions throughout the university, initiatives that will help students. We had a total of about 8 million that came in from the operating units. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, we tried to do $2 million worth of reinvestment. You can do some very quick math on that scan of where we're at in the major budget parameters. We wanted to show you this because it's important that we understand where we're going. What this shows you in the green is the percentage of the operating budget that over the years has come from the government grant. And you'll see in 2011, 2012, we were getting roughly 60% of our operating funds out of the government of Saskatchewan. In 2017-18, that's 51.7%. So it's dropped by nearly 10% over those years. Our tuition revenue, however, has grown to make up for that. In 2011-12, about 31% of the operating revenues of the university came from tuition and fees. Last year, basically 40%, or very nearly 40%. And this is a trend being seen across the country as governments retreat more and more from operating funding and universities become more dependent on student tuition and fee revenue. which is not as secure as grant revenue is. Enrollments can be very volatile. And then up at the top, then there's things like contract revenue, sale of services, and so on. One of the things that the board has asked us to do is to develop a revenue generation strategy to take account of the fact that that is going to have to grow in coming years. We're going to have to find new ways to bring in operating revenue to the university. And we have talked about a few of those previously, and we'll have an update on at least one of them later in the presentation this morning. There's a lot of numbers on that. But basically, if you just focus on the right-hand column, this gives you a summary of the 5-year progress of where we're going on operating grant. And so if you look down here, the annual average increase in the operating grant has been 0.37%. When all of the math is done and you section everything out, the average increase is less than 0.5%, average annual increase. Yet every year, costs are going up 3-4%. And this is the major source of our challenges with the budget and the major source of a lot of detailed work and bringing in a balanced budget for the board's approval.
In this time, I get to have the bad news slides. Tom gets the easier one. This slide is mainly just to portray what our real challenge is. And so we've talked many, many years about what we call structural deficit and things about the trajectory of where we're headed relative to, and Tom showed you what the average increase in the grant would be. Despite that average increase in the grant, our embedded costs in terms of salaries, and of course more than 75% of our total expenditures in the university relate to salaries and things. Of course, the trajectory is quite a bit higher, the average being over 3% a year. With the grant increase, it's going up by less than half of a percent. So you can see the 3 lines here, one for our salaries, one for, and of course embedded in there are the progression through the ranks or the increments and things, depending on which contract it is. Inflation, the black line, of course, the government grant, which has made a turn back down to virtually 0 over that 5-year period. So that's a challenge. And of course, the students rightly note that that's almost always on the backs of them. So the tuition increase and things like that, because that's increasing, the grant isn't increasing, and so we get a fair bit of feedback in that regard. Mainly because we put this slide up, mainly because we get a number of different questions and people sort of think that we're structured in different ways around the campus. Of course, our biggest group and things by far, or at least particularly in terms of salary and things like that, is the academic group. Rightly so, that's our core business. One of the things that jumped out at me when I first saw this slide, though, was the last column and things like that. Actually, how much we engage the students and how much money is going back into student activity. Of course, QP 2419 is all of the different ways that we take and employ students, either research assistants, teaching assistants, or in places like kinesiology and things like that.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Microphone, please. I'll ask loud, and David can repeat it. So the previous slide, can you tell me what the figures are telling us? APT, 30,000, or 30 million. That's total sorry.
30 million, yeah. So that's the total salary envelope for each one of the groups, just combined. The dot is a combined number for both base salary and benefits. The 2 columns, one is, I should have mentioned that. The dark blue column is the total salary envelope for all people in each of the groups. And then the light blue is the total cost of benefits for all people in that group. And the dot is the combination of those 2. So, legitimate question, Art. Thank you very much. Hey, another slide, and I only put this up. There's lots of controversy around this. This is one small piece of data and things like that we take and use to try and understand, in part, some of the impacts of actions that we've taken in past budgets. And you can look to changes in the movement of the line. There's basically 2 inputs here. This is each faculty in terms of what. Can't hear me?
Gone dead?
Out of battery? No? Still got light on in here. Working now?
Take this one.
Yeah.
Is it working okay now? Okay, let's try this, and let me know if it goes off again.
You're being too dynamic on stage.
I don't know, maybe I'm moving too much and shifted that mute button in my pocket somehow. So this is one of many inputs and things like that. Of course, we've got presentations, we've got other data and things like that, but just to try and get a sense of tracking. And in fact, as we look back, we could see places where we made investments in faculties, and then that sort of brings the line down. But it shows the difference in faculties and things like that too, like obviously completely different impacts, completely different ways of operating in some of the different faculties, et cetera. But basically two inputs that really change things here. One is if we make investments in terms of increasing the budget in a faculty, that will then take and move the line up. If they increase the number of students in a faculty, of course, the average cost per student and things like that then comes down. So all this to say, we've got lots of different data and things like that that we're sharing with various people that are involved in the budget. This is one of many, an example of some of the different data that we have. You can come back to it in questions if you have questions later on as well.
Okay, thanks, Dave. As part of the budget process this year, of course, every unit made requests for increased personnel. And I think we had around 36 in total positions being requested. So the task given to Council Committee on Budget, and our chair is here, Monica is here, if you have any specific questions, I suppose. So we took those 36 positions, and then members of CCB went through each one of them and then ranked in order of CCB's perception of order of importance. And this is what we have. So from the academic staffing side, ranked number 1, a position in social work, petroleum systems, computer science, ESL, and sport management. And on the academic support side, psychology clinical director, UR International, scholarship officer, recruiter, academic advisor, and institutional design. And on the there we go. On the administrative staff, this is the ranking that the members of CCB came up with. And important to note that the members of the CCB also attended all of the budget presentations by each unit, and this was their ranking. So yes, if you have any questions afterwards, happy to entertain them, or Monica can provide you with some detail. Okay. So, a good news slide is coming. So, obviously, now that we know that it's a 0% rather than a 2% cut, these are some of the challenges that we have. And I won't read all of these. I'll give you a second to go through them. But these are some of the things that we're going to be thinking of as we go forward and understand exactly what the implications of our budget are. Okay. All right. Now let's get to the good news. So, quick research update. I'll go through each one of these very, very quickly to give you a sense. Also, I want to give you a comparison with where we were last year. So, you may, I hope you've all heard of the $8.8 million we received from the RCMP for our post-traumatic stress research. So that project is up and running. We're thrilled about that. We also received, and I hope you also heard this announcement, that we received $30 million from the federal government for CIPCERT, which is the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. So that is ongoing. We've just received that funding, and we're going through the process of how that whole institute is going to be set up and deliver the services and research that we're looking at. We're also, this is perhaps a bit premature, but we're very close to finishing off the contract with the provincial government for the regional data center. This is something that we've been working on for many, many years. This is a StatsCan regional data center, so our faculty and students can have access to StatsCan's data. So this is more or less in our hands. As far as SSHRC is concerned, so we've received 1.1 million in SSHRC. Comparison with last year, we were With SHIRK, we were at 685,000. So we're up in SHIRK. CIHR, this was a huge jump for us, and part of the reason why the funding formula has worked in our favor this year. Last year we were at 1.3 million, and this year we're at 4.7 million. NSERC, oh, how I wish I could give you data, but the NSERC computer apparently crashed this morning. Sally, we thought we might know by the time I got up here.
Or just checking regularly.
Okay.
It's. We can update you, but probably not till after lunch, I would say.
Yeah, we're very optimistic of our NSERC results, but we just don't know yet. MyTax, this is the agency, the federal agency that provides us with partial funding for graduate students who are working with industry. And this year, as you see, it's 715,000, and last year we were at 380,000. So our MyTax funding has gone way up. Province, we're up slightly from last year. Other miscellaneous, actually, we're a little bit down on this one, but relative to the other revenues, we're in very good shape. I do want to point out, this is, so there's no confusion, this is research revenue awarded. It is not research revenue received, because some of these contracts are multi-year contracts. So please understand, this is the research that we've been awarded, the research funding we've been awarded, not the research that we've received, because that pans out over several years. However, relative to last year, we were at 13 million, and this year we're at around 25 million in awarded research funding. So outstanding performance from our researchers, outstanding performance from our research office, outstanding performance from financial services, from the Office of Resource Planning, from SMS. I mean, when we see these announcements, we see the face of the researcher, but there's a huge team behind each and every one of them. So we're doing very well. Part of the support is the research cohort program, which this year we have, as you can see, 44 participants from right across disciplines, which was great by all accounts. It's gone very well, and we'll certainly repeat that next year. Internal funding, we continue to provide internal funding through the President's Fund and the SHIRK President's Fund. As well, we have a smaller pot of money, actually a very smaller pot of money for cluster-oriented research. FGSR unit review was conducted. That's up on the web. I think in general it was a very positive review. Certainly showed that there are areas that we can improve in. One was TA scholarship. The reviewer suggested that our scholarship funding was on par with other universities of our size, but our TA budget was not sufficient. So we're exploring ways that we can enhance that to get ourselves at least up to the medium place in the field. And the AVPRD search, as you may know, we're down to 3 candidates, and I believe the first interview is on the 25th, and it's 25th, 26th, 27th. We've got, I think, a really strong pool of 3 candidates, and I invite all of you to come out. There's presentations, I think, each one of those days at 4:30. And please come out, listen to the presentations, ask questions, and give your feedback. So, with that.
Thanks. Next slide, a blend of good news and bad news. Of course, great news with all of the projects going on, but our base PMR funding, preventive maintenance and renewal, that sort of maintained the status quo with bricks and mortar and computer equipment and things like that. All of our core things remained unchanged. So this is something that we've been arguing with government for a long time, that it is, in a report that they had done, it said the number should be larger than this to even meet the lowest levels of prudence and things. And so we continue to try and get that up higher, but it is unchanged this year. A little bit of good news on that one is that they did put increase a pot of what they call supplemental PMR funding. It was increased by $900,000. That's something we can apply for, and I know we will be. If it's $900,000 across the province, then if we can get about $300,000 of it or so, that would be a typical proportional share for us. So maybe a little bit more money for some supplemental projects, but otherwise the same base funding. The other projects on this list and things like that won't be new to you, so I won't go through them all. But good news on the College Avenue campus, one itself, in terms of we did get a small incremental increase in that project from the SIF federal funding, because we were so far progressed that we were able to actually spend some money that other places across the country weren't able to spend. And we're even optimistic that even though the official time ends at the end of this month, all the work is supposed to be done, and we will have done all of our federal funding portion of that project. But we're optimistic that we might be able to get an extension, or that we've got the extension away, but that we might be able to get some additional funding from other projects across the country that didn't get finished, that may be up to as much as $500,000 additional to put into funding for that one. So great work there. Of course, the lab building modernization and the SIF project is done there, and the charts that we showed last year with respect to energy is one of the direct attributes, but also, and thanks again to the patience of all of the researchers and people living through the construction in the lab building while we've done those upgrades. And other projects we can talk to as well. One of the slides we mentioned that we'll do a little bit more on the energy in this. We showed you the lab building. This is the total campus over the past, since 2006, so the past 11 years and things. We've driven down, despite the fact that we've added buildings during that time, in particular a huge building in Kissick, the residence building, which are high intensity because the students are in there, sort of living, breathing, using utilities, cooking, facilities, etc. throughout that. It should be a real add intensity to the campus, but because of everything that we're doing, not just the design of Kissick itself was quite efficient, but also all the work in the lab building, the energy upgrades across campus, you can see how our energy usage is dropping dramatically. We see it on the budget balance sheet. Tom showed you the number, $435,000 that we're declaring as a dividend this year, and that's base budget money. In total, I estimated at least $2 million a year in base budget money that we've saved over that time period. And so that's money that has gone back into investments in all of the other parts of the campus and things like that. And so all the different things we do, we know we get some complaints about managing heat and fans and things like that on weekends or downtimes and things like that. But that is money that is going straight back into a dividend for us to run the rest of the university, to provide more academic, more student support, more scholarships, more of whatever, all the different things we take and spend. So some huge savings there. And while it's the good work of the folks in facilities management and things, but it's also every user that then takes and shuts lights off or shuts their computer off when they go at night and uses things like the print optimization program, the number of printers and things like that we're doing. All of this adds up to the bottom line and estimated at least $2 million. More specifically, we're taking a dividend of $435,000 this year alone. Just to give you a bit of an update, and there's really no update to take and report here. We'd mentioned these things before. We've taken and done evaluation of the Innovation Place Research Park to the south of us. The government has done the same sort of thing. We've shared those with one another, and we're basically waiting for U of S to catch up. We're a little bit ahead of them. We haven't had any recent negotiations and things at all, but we're ready to talk to them when they're ready.
Thank you, sir. So just a quick update. This is actually as of yesterday. We're at nearly 4,000 registrations with 7 weeks to go. A little bit behind where we'd like to be on those registrations, but we're confident that we will get to where we had hoped. The travel awards to this point, this is basically for graduate students from across the country to come in. 602 travel awards have been made. We're hoping for about 400 volunteers. We'd initially thought we'd need 500, but we think we can do with 400. And we're at 251 right now, so if you haven't had an opportunity to volunteer for Congress, I think another note went out yesterday or the day before, please consider doing that. And as I say, in 7 weeks, There will be more social scientists and humanists on this campus than ever before. If you want to see the maximum density of anthropologists in Regina, it will be during that period.
Like a black hole.
With all respect to anthropologists of all kinds. So just to wrap up very quickly, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be doing some pretty intensive work, putting the budget into final shape. It goes to the board for approval at the board meetings early in May, the 3rd and 4th of May. The week after that, we will have the budget letters ready, and as you've seen in previous years, those budget letters contain a detailed list of all allocations and cuts, if necessary, to every operating unit, and those will be ready the week of the 7th of May. And then we'll have our final budget forum, walking you through all of that stuff in the budget letter on the 11th of May. So thank you very much for bearing with us during that kind of lengthy presentation, and we are more than happy now to take your questions. Again, because we're recording this for the people in Saskatoon and those who want to see it over and over again, if you've got a question, please go to one of the microphones. If you could state who you are and maybe what unit you're associated with, we'll do our best to answer any questions you have.
It's like my class.
Pat Patton from Security and Operations. Did you get any indication from the budget on what's happening with the PCC, Provincial Capital Commission?
To the best of my knowledge, I didn't pick up anything on there at all. Of course, PCC is well established now, and so it's, I think from the government perspective, no change in plan, but they are going through a transition and things. So I don't think it's a new policy direction at all, but just the administration has to catch up with what's happening in with respect to the amalgamation. So things in, Pat would be aware of this, and that's in part the question, because we've got a big decision to make here at the university and things with respect to one of the things that the Provincial Capital Commission will be looking at is the efficiencies in terms of how to do roads and grounds maintenance. So of course the entire park is done by Wascana Centre folks right now, but the city duplicates that because they do every other park in the rest of the city, so they've got entire staff there, and of course government has got an incredible number of grounds and buildings and roads and things, and so they have their own capability, so there's an awful lot of duplication. And so we need to get ready if they make a change in terms of how they do it. Every other university around the country does it differently than we do it here. We're sort of unique. So there's some transition perhaps coming there, and we need to be ready for it, but there's no specific direction on that yet.
Other questions, folks?
Jermaine McKenzie, URSU president. One of the things that I picked up from the budget letter that was sent from the minister, and something that you referred to in the presentation, is regard to the university having to move to more revenue generating ideas. I just wanted to figure out what type of ideas have you come up with already in terms of satisfying that requirement from the government. And I'm just curious because I have some ideas about how that could be done. Maybe we could start having corporations sponsor individual courses. I don't know, but I'm just worried as a humanities person that in a few years' time, my field would not be seen as important because it doesn't generate revenue as such. So as a student, I'm really worried about the direction and the corporatization of the university. And if you look at the diagram, the charts that you show, students are now paying 40% of the university operating budget in their tuition. Mm-hmm. And the government is close to 50%, right? And now we've been asked to see how we can generate other private revenues to compensate for a lack of government funding. And it just doesn't sit well with me as a student presently. and looking into the future for the university. So maybe share with us some of the revenue generating ideas that you have thought of so far.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's a great question. The board has, as I said earlier, directed us to develop a revenue generation strategy. So we're taking a document to them for their early consideration in May. It would be a general discussion with no decisions made at that point. But let me give you 3 examples. Research Park has already been up there. We're looking at that because if we think we can get a good price for those buildings south of University Drive, and if we think, after very careful analysis, that those buildings, through rentals and so on and so forth, would make us money that we can then put back into the operating budget, which would then go back out into the Faculty of Arts, the Faculty of MAP, and so on, we would look at that very, very seriously. That's one. Another one would be following, I think, the great example from the Public Policy School. A couple of years ago, they introduced a new master's program, fully online. It's designed for the mid-career professionals, so people who are employed, fully employed, who don't want to come out to campus but want a master's qualification. That degree is called the MHA, the Master's in Health Administration. It had enrollment targets of X. They've hit 2X. They've more than doubled their targets, and they have enrollments in every province across the country. They're using some of the proceeds from that additional tuition money actually to pay for a professorial position in the school. So we were able to hire a new professor in the Public Policy School who works in that area based on the revenue from that new degree program. So we're looking at other possibilities essentially for mid-career professional programs. One that has come up and you may have heard of before is called the MHIM, the Master of Health Information Management. We did a detailed proposal. Brian's office did a very careful business case. We first brought that forward, I think, 2 years ago, and again last year. We just didn't have the funds to get it started because you have an initial investment to start the thing up. You need to hire a professor. You need to develop the courses. But the business case that suggests that 3 or 4 years down the road, that too could reduce or could return a lot of revenue to the university, which could then be used for things like supplemental learning in science, maybe another new faculty position in science, and so on. A third example of potential revenue generation. We're looking now at how we use the campus in the summer, when we aren't running as many courses, when we have a lot of what we thought was a lot of vacant space. Do we increase the use of the campus for things like summer sports camps, the EYES camps, and things like that? Do we do more kind of convention and hotel business on campus so that we can bring those revenues into the ancillaries, boost the ancillaries, and again, try to feed through to help fund core campus operations? Here's the catch. If we want to hire permanent faculty and staff, we've got to be really confident that those revenue streams are pretty secure. Because if something happens and we aren't bringing those revenues in, we can very quickly go into deficit. I think every university in North America looks jealously, and somebody in the room will know which university is, I think in Florida, that holds the patent or the rights to Gatorade. Is it South Florida or Central Florida? One of those Florida universities owns Gatorade. And that revenue stream has bought them tens of millions of dollars. As you drink your Gatorade, you're helping fund a Florida university. We'd all like to find our Gatorade, and we haven't quite got it for Regina yet. But those are 3 examples of numerous examples that are going to the board for discussion. And if you have ideas, please send them in. Do you want to add anything?
Hey, sure. I'd just like to add what ongoing activity is that relates directly to that. And I'll always put a plug out to our colleagues at CCE and continuing education, of course, all of the faculties that then support CCE in their teaching. Because that's an operation that fits directly into generating revenue for this campus to support basically the undergraduate and graduate programs. These numbers might be a little bit out of date, but they are a gross revenue activity of about $29 million, and they generate a net profit of about $12 million. Would that be about the good average, Lamont? Almost 13 million this year. That 13 million, just like it was another dividend, just like the energy savings and things like that, which goes right back into our base budget. We are cognizant of the concern, as Tom mentioned at the end, that is that sustainable. We have taken and put that into base money, and so it's a little bit at risk. But each year, and as Lamont increased my number from 12 million that I had in my mind up to 13 million this year, that's an additional million this year as additional revenue generating, which isn't on the backs of, in particular, traditional students at all. These are all new students, typically our colleagues in CC and others going out finding new areas of demand, creating programs and things like that generates a revenue to the bottom line. So we need to continue that. That's what we're good at, teaching and learning, and so growing those even more. So that's a huge enterprise there. And now that they'll be moving into new facilities in September, we're hoping that they can even go bigger and harder in that area.
Maybe just add to that too, that I think everybody in the room knows, CCE is cost recovery. It's not a base budgeted unit like a faculty. So they've got to pay for all of the costs of their faculty and staff before they return that profit to the university. They've got to cover all of their operating expenses. And so that was a 29 million versus 13 million, the gap there. Are there expenses for salaries of staff and faculty, benefits for those people, advertising expenses, plus they're also going to be covering the cost of the mortgage for the College Avenue campus, or the cost of the borrowing on the College Avenue campus renewal through those proceeds, while at the same time returning millions of dollars to the university, which is then flowed out to all of the operating units in the operating budget allocations. It's quite an operation. And for those from CCE in the room, thank you very much for all the work you're doing. Roger, can you come to a microphone, please? There's a mic here. Yeah.
So I'm not an accountant. So if we do a big, and I was late because I was teaching this morning. So when we do a purchase, if we were to purchase the research park area, how does that work in terms of budgeting? Presumably we're purchasing an asset, so it wouldn't go into our calculation of a deficit, right?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Explain?
Sure. Like the intent, we haven't got to the point to make the decision and things like that, but the board and through consultants and lots of review of other universities and things like that, have got lots of different advice in terms of how we take and make sure that this stays at arm's length from the university, and so that it has its own debt, not university debt, and that we only use it perhaps much, I used the word dividend before, but perhaps some of the profit and things like that, design it so that has the capability of coming back to the university,
Okay,
perhaps.
So, yeah, because I mean, a lot of boards, presumably our board as well, likes to have a balanced budget, but I guess my concern is if we are purchasing new assets as part of a business kind of opportunity, that's not factored in as a deficit kind of a thing, but as an investment. So that's good, that helps me. The other thing I'm just thinking about too is, in the Faculty of Arts, and the concern about the humanities as well, I mean, we've innovated with the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics program, where we brought existing faculty with fairly small amounts of cost to offer a new program that's revenue generating. And it might be, to the extent we can repackage some things, might be a way of generating revenues without a lot of cost, because we've already got the existing investments. But
yeah, that's great, and I think a classic example of that is what colleagues in MAP have done over the past few years. I mean, the faculty has been rebranded. It used to be Fine Arts, it's now Media Art and Performance. If you walk through Riddell, I mean, you see not only the graphics advertising the faculty, but you see these posters, and if I were a student, I'd be taking some of those courses. They are just fascinating. Their enrollments after years of flatness or decline are starting to pick back up. What's the word I'm looking for? Track back up again. The Creative Technologies program is doing very well. So I know a lot of the faculties are engaged in thinking, how do we do things in a new way, conserving our core strengths, but trying to attract and retain new populations of students so that we can succeed. And MAP, I think, is just one example across campus of some really neat work.
And the nice thing, too, is it preserves old and new.
Yeah.
So we still keep all the majors in those other areas, but we also have new majors that we wouldn't have had. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Dennis Fitzpatrick from Science. I've got two basic questions. And the first question is, we're talking about sessionals and precarious workforce. When we were looking for those numbers, we couldn't find those available anywhere. And we couldn't, basically we did a hand count of letters to come up with the ballpark number of somewhere around the area of about 45 to 50% of the courses. We couldn't figure out how many of those students it touched. With this massive data that you're presenting us with, one would think a basic piece of information is who are teaching our students where. Can that come forward in another budget presentation? Because I find it very frustrating to live in this nebulous world of no information.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. We can do that. We're actually asking the faculties now to do a hand count, and it's more complicated, as usual, around this place than anyone would have presumed, but we're asking them to count what percentage of taught sections this term are being offered by sessional lecturers. And the results are due in today. Some people have already responded. Off the top of my head, it ranges at this point from a low of 3% in either engineering or nursing to a high of over 60% this term in social work. And part of the difficulty in social work is, of course, we do a lot of off-campus teaching in social work. We've had a couple of people ill who've had to be replaced or on leave who've had to be replaced with sessional teaching. But it's very high right now in social work, and you will all have seen the concerns expressed by the social work students in Saskatoon about that very issue. So what I'm saying, as far as we can see right now, there's a wide variation from faculty to faculty and sometimes from term to term, but we'll have those data for you at the next budget presentation.
Thank you. Can we go back to the capital project slide? I've got a question from it, several questions from it.
Yep.
Well,
Okay, my first questions are very basic. So the bottom looks very good. 377 million deferred maintenance backlog is reduced by $112 million. But when we've been in your office, we talked about the fact that much of that deferred maintenance has been converted into long-term debt. Because that's where the that's what the bond was produced for. I'm correct in my recollection of that meeting?
It wouldn't be correct to say that the deferred maintenance is turned into debt at all, because deferred maintenance is just, say, building work that we should get around to be doing at some time. Like the best example would be College West. Well, the best example is everything on that list. College West or College Avenue. So here's a College Avenue 100-year-old building that we've taken and completely gutted, and basically it'll be a new building when we take and reopen it and things like that. And so the deferred maintenance on that is the projection of how much it would take to take and get it back to what it was. So our other buildings, yeah, whether we need to do it right away, no, we keep on tackling the worst ones first and things. So it is a bit of a nebulous number, but work that eventually will need to be done at some point. But it's not debt. It's not debt.
But no. But you finance College Avenue with debt. You finance the residents with debt. So in tackling this backlog and changing your budget projections,
Yep.
you basically increased the debt of the long-term debt of the university by $80 million. From
Correct.
120 to about $200 million, something in that neighborhood.
That's correct.
So when
Yep.
we talk about addressing these kinds of things, I think it's almost logical to have on the balance sheet that you've done this deferred maintenance, but you've also created another type of long-term obligation, which is debt, which we're going to pay down over a period of time.
Sure. Hey, well, let me, if there's concerns about the debt and things like that, let me talk about how that's handled. Of course, the ancillary debt is a typical business plan type environment where we build a residence. Kissa could be a good example, or the renovation of the College Avenue, or the College West residence, where there's a future revenue stream that'll take and pay off that debt. So good investment to take and create facilities that then help with recruitment, retention, et cetera, help our operating side in that regard, but they're totally independent from a financial perspective. So we have a business case that'll pay those back over the years. Good point about the College Avenue one, and Tom, when he made the comments about revenue generation and things, is that the increased activity, first of all, half of the project is paid for with federal money to be able to take and do it. We've got some debt to take and match for our matching piece, and the increased revenue from the College Avenue operations, particularly CCE, will be used to take and pay down that debt. And so a fairly good, solid revenue stream there to take and pay that down. In fact, small amount, if we took all of the profit from CC in one particular year, 13 million, then it would be paid down in less than 2 years. Of course, we're not going to do that because we're taking the dividend to take and enhance other ones. So the increased activity of about $1 million a year we'll use to take and pay down that debt.
You know, I still remain puzzled because when we asked for the long-term plan on ancillaries and requested it specifically, we basically got a spreadsheet which did not leave me with confidence that we were going to pay it down in the future. And so it would be really nice if that kind of information were made available because, I mean, right now you look at the audited financial statements and you see that the ancillaries are in significant debt, what they're going to be at the end of this year, about $17 million in debt. I mean, that's, if you take what they were in debt last year and you add the $13 million onto it. So it's hard to imagine without something tangible that there is a route to pay it off. And I'd appreciate seeing it produced at some time. Thanks.
I guess I can say this because I'm not an accountant. What you're saying is it's hard to trust accountants in their projections and things like that because they are only projections, of course. But I guess I take comfort in looking at we call it a case study. We know exactly what we had projected when we built the residences, what used to be North and South Tower in 2004. We had a business case that, of course, showed us getting into debt and things. And it looked like big, scary numbers and things like that. And then eventually it takes and pays back. And we can show, well, we know exactly what happened with those. We were ahead of the business plan. We were, the debt was paid back in a much shorter period of time. And it then contributed to be able to then take and invest and build things like Kissick. So things that are good for the campus. And so projections are scary when you're going into debt. It's like someone buying a house and you take on a mortgage and things. That's pretty scary as well anytime you're getting into debt. But you look at it based on your ability to pay, set up your budget for your mortgage payments over the period of time. And at the end of the day, 25 years later, you might have your mortgage paid off, hopefully sometime sooner than that, but no difference. So when I look back at that, in each of these projects are about the same scale. They're both about the same degree of scary numbers and things, but one that we can take and show as a proven result, the North and South Tower is well ahead of the business plan. So in that regard, not scary at all. And the fact that we got a bond issue that is an all-time record almost across Canada and extremely low rates and things like that, which is even better rates than the initial business plan that we had for it, it takes and gives me an awful lot of comfort as well.
I hear you, but the issue was when we asked for it, none was produced. And it would give me great comfort if a business plan could be produced and shared.
Well, it sounds like I'm not sure what more you need. It sounds like you've got the numbers and things like that, knowing exactly what the debt and things like that are. It sounds like a comfort level thing, and I don't know how I can. We can't prove what's going to happen in the future. All we can do is say that these are the business cases, these are the revenue streams, these are the debt, and show past examples to sort of show. Every other business does the same thing.
All I got was one spreadsheet showing that last year they lost $4 million. That's not a very comforting document.
I might just add too, with regard to the residences, that as we bring in more students from outside the province, we need more space for them. Those residences generate a lot of income and help us retain students at a much greater rate. And those students, of course, then pay tuition that otherwise would not be available to us or would be lost to the university if the students chose to go elsewhere. But in the revenue generation scheme too, we hope to be using those buildings more extensively in the summer months from May through August for things like conventions and basically to compete to a certain extent with hotels in Regina at a lower cost and supplement our revenue streams in there. So what seems to be a fair amount of debt for, say, Keshik is totally woven in with the university's projections for enrollments, for tuition and fee revenue, for student retention, and all of those other factors. Any other questions? Yes.
Smart from Information Services. How does that ranking of new positions that are needed across the university, how does that play into the budgets that you give each department?
How does it play into the budgets we give?
So if you decided that the first new position needs to go to IS,
Right.
then that means that we get a certain percentage higher of that budget, and then who makes the decision to actually hire that person?
That's a great question, Laura. Monica, the chair of CCB, is here. We take those rankings very seriously, and I think, in fact, it's fair to say last year, which is the first year it was done really systematically, we followed the advice of CCB. The difficulty is that those rankings are fairly extensive, and we've got very few resources to play around with. So when it comes for the time for the budget team to sit down, we start doing that next week, and considering those rankings, we try to weigh a whole variety of factors. But with the rankings themselves as coming in from CCB are taken very seriously. And we start thinking about things like comparative enrollments, comparative investment per student in faculties. What do you do if you need a faculty position here, but there's a critical need in information services for network security? That's when the real discussions begin. Those discussions are nuanced, they're data-driven, but at the end of the day, it's the budget team that makes a decision based on all of that advice and all of that input. We then give that advice to the president, who determines what the budget that goes forward to the board for its approval will be.
And then how it actually gets applied. So any one of these things, if I used an example, and just had the administrative one up there, where there was an IS position or say the social work position, if it's decided to fund those positions, then that unit will get the salary and benefits equivalent to taking pay. So if it's a $80,000 faculty position that in social work that is decided will be funded, then $80,000 as base budget will be transferred to the faculty of social work for them to initiate a search for next year. So that's how we'll actually do it. Once we decide those things, the budget allocation made to the unit.
And all of those are detailed in painful detail in the budget letter that will come out the week of the 7th of May. And you can, if you want to look at past letters, they're all up on the budget update page. So if you're having trouble sleeping some night, it's great reading. Any other questions that people have? We've got about 15 minutes, so we welcome them.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sort of.
Good morning. Can you
There
hear
you
me?
go.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Yeah.
I need one of these for my kids. Kevin Siebert, Executive Director, IRFA. And as always, in previous budget forums, I stand here on behalf of faculty, administrative, professional, and technical folks. And so my perspective is always people first. In the APT and the QP negotiations, there wasn't very much in ways of compensation gains in their first or 2 years of the contract. How does that play into this year's fiscal?
The estimates of those were built into the estimates we showed you on the updated budget challenge. Obviously, when we go into negotiations, we're in a negotiating situation. We try to make a projection as to what we think the settlement will be, but we wait until the negotiation is done before finally fixing the number. The estimate that you see there of $3.3 million in increase in salary and benefits is based on our best estimate and known numbers from the contracts that have been settled, what we estimate for contracts that haven't been settled, what we estimate for progression through the ranks, what we estimate for merit, and what we estimate for promotion costs. So it's an estimate right now, because we have one major contract that we'll be talking with you about starting on Tuesday very seriously.
Hi everyone, André Magnan, Sociology. If I understood your presentation correctly, the 2.5% tuition increase was based on an assumption that we would get more than 3% increase from the provincial government. Given that there is no increase in funding, what sort of tuition increase can we anticipate? Is all of that gap going to be presumably accounted for by an even larger tuition increase?
Great question. Let me say this. It's the board that makes the decision on question. We take a recommendation to them with some alternatives. So we'll be doing a lot of thinking through this in the next couple of days. Just let me provide a little context of what's going on right now near us. Manitoba, I think, is up 6%. They've announced a tuition increase of 6%, 6.6, thank you, Brian, which reflects the fact that they've held tuition artificially low for some years. They've effectively almost frozen tuition in Manitoba, and they're starting now to let it rise. Saskatoon, a week ago, announced an average tuition increase of 4.8%. I'll say this, we do not intend, based on the signaling that we've been given to date from the board, we do not intend to take a tuition increase forward that's of anything like that magnitude. We're going to do everything possible to keep the tuition increase as low as we can do it. At the end of the day, the board has to make the call on this based on its judgment of where we are financially. But the fact that tuition has to go up at all reflects the fact, as you already pointed out, that government revenue is either flat or in decline, and tuition and fees remains our second largest source of revenue to pay, basically salaries, benefits, and operating costs. Whoops. But again, we do not intend to take forward a recommendation of the board that is even close to what Saskatoon is doing. Theoretically, the board could say to us, we're going to do what Saskatoon does. I can't speak on their behalf, but I would be very, very surprised if they went in that direction.
I would just like to say that I appreciate that your comments, and I think we should be doing everything possible to keep that tuition increase as low as possible. It's very, very hard for students, I think, to see this going up each and every year.
Yep. Thank you, Andre.
Yegundar, Faculty of Arts. My question is more specific. It is about graduate funding. So according to slide, CCB evaluates and ranks staffing requests across the campus. Where does the request for graduate funding increase, for example, fit in this picture? It comes from the budget.
Yes, that's right, from the CCB. Well, there was, I think we presented one option that had an increase in graduate student funding that would be then put back into FGSR for TA scholarship. But that's just one option, and we haven't, that would be a board decision as well. So we recognize that in particular for TA funding that's a weakness that we have right now, and we want to address it, but we're not quite certain just yet where that's coming from.
Maybe I could add to that. So let's just say, and again, this may be an alternative that could be presented, that we propose 2.5 for the undergrads, which are our major tuition pool. That's where we get about 88% of our tuition revenue comes from the undergraduate population, because it's very big. But let's say we said to the board, would you consider 4.5 on grad, but we would take 2% of the 4.5 and return all of that revenue, say, to TAs, so that the actual tuition increase would be 2.5%, and the additional 2.0 would be returned directly to, let's say, research-based MSc, MA, and PhD students. The course-based master's students might not like that very much, but how do we fund graduate education at a level that's even vaguely competitive with some of the big schools, which effectively now pay for graduate education? The University of Toronto, if you get in there, graduate education is almost free now because of the resources they have, the endowment income they have, the research revenue that they have. How do we compete with those schools for the best graduate students? It might be something like that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Anything else?
I think Milton's question was about what CCB recommended about increasing.
And CCB hasn't recommended any increase in tuition. I think it would be prudent that a group of faculty members should not advise the budget team on increase in tuition because that is purview of the board of directors. So we haven't engaged in that kind of discussion, and I don't see in the future that should be in the list of recommendations.
So my question was more about. No, my question was more about a request for increases in graduate funding in the form of scholarships and what kind of role CCB plays in that process, right? We have their recommendations regarding staffing positions. Our request for increases in graduate funding also evaluated by CCB, and if they do evaluate them, how are they evaluated with respect to other requests? That was my question. Not tuition fees, but scholarship increases.
Sure. So the ranking there, it's for position. Basically, it's a budget line for positions. And then for scholarship, if I recall correctly, and I have no problem to stand corrected, the request from Faculty of Grad Studies and Research to increase graduate funding was conditional increasing tuition, and that's why we didn't discuss that.
Just want to add one little bit of complexity to that too. If roughly 88% of our revenues on tuition and fees come from undergraduates, how much of that should we be transferring to the graduate operation in the form of scholarship and bursaries, or not bursary support, but basic student support for grad students? Should we be taking money out of the undergraduate pool to help pay for grad students? That's one of the things that we talk about as well. And what is the appropriate degree of cross-subsidization? So now it's analogous to the notion that there are some faculties that generate more tuition revenue than we give them an operating budget. To what extent is that fair to the source faculty? How do we ensure then that faculties that do not generate sufficient tuition revenue have enough revenue to sustain their programs? That's another one of those wonderful budget discussions, lengthy and complex. Anything else? If not, we would like to thank you, and we would, particularly Jermaine McKenzie, if you've got, oh, Jermaine's gone. Just when we thought he had the solution to our revenue woes. Any suggestions, please stop us in the hallway, send something in. The video and slides will be up on the budget update page within a couple of days, and the hard work starts next week. We see you back on the 11th, and thank you very much for coming.
Before you go, everyone, we just got NSERC results in.
Oh.
And we're at 4.2 million from all grant categories compared to 2.9 million last year. So NSERC scholars, way to go.
Cool.